Well, good afternoon and welcome and happy Valentine's Day. Hope everybody's having a great day today. Today, we're going to talk about negotiation skills and a little bit about how we can get the upper hand when negotiating. So if you're joining us from the East Coast and Central region, good afternoon. And if you're joining us from the West Coast, good morning. If you have any questions during this session, feel free to click the chat button and you can send me a question and I'll be glad to answer it. And don't hesitate to do it during the presentation. I don't mind stopping to answering questions. So just chat on in if you need to ask a question and we'll get that answered as we move forward. So let's get started on negotiating skills. So first of all, when we go into negotiate, we really want to know what our context is, right? One is short-term and one is long-term. So what's the difference? Kellogg management professor Leah Thompson wrote The Mind and the Heart of the Negotiator. And she says that the interaction between a customer and the wait staff at a highway roadside diner is one of the few one-shot negotiations that happen in life. So one-shot negotiations, think about yourself at a restaurant. There's little chance that you're ever going to see that staff person again or that the patron will be returning if you're out in a one-shot negotiation. So most of us don't really have one-shot negotiations. What we do in life is we have long-term negotiations, typically with employment negotiations is a primary example. And if it's a long-term negotiation, you need to manage not only monetary value, but the impression you're making. And so I want to talk a little bit about that because it's really important that we want to get what we want to get out of the negotiation, but we want to make sure that we have the relationship and we make a good impression. So whether you're negotiating for a salary or for a contract with a prospective client, let's make sure you know what your context is. Now, a lot of people say, why should I make the first offer? They think that if they make the first offer, they lose out. So making the first offer is called the anchoring effect. And let's talk about what we mean from that. If you start high, the other person might adjust the figure down slightly, but that's typically a stronger position than starting low and trying to negotiate up. So if you're negotiating for a salary, for instance, you want to go high. And if your negotiation is wanting to get a lower position, then we're going to talk about that too. But if you're negotiating for a price that you want high, whoever makes the first offer essentially drops what we call an anchor on the table. They might say that your offer is maybe ridiculous, but nevertheless, unconsciously, you've set the anchor. So you now have the upper hand. And a lot of people don't want to make the first offer because they think that gives them the lower hand. It actually gives you the upper hand. And we're going to talk a little bit about what that first offer should look like. So just don't throw out a number because we're going to talk through this, right? So typically when you make the first offer, you really have the upper hand. It's not really a win-win situation because you want to come out ahead. And everybody thinks going into negotiations, if it's a win-win negotiation, everybody wins. And that's not necessarily true. We also want to make an aggressive offer. People are usually overly cautious when making first offers because they're afraid they're going in too high and they're going to price themselves out. But there's a strategy to that. So let's walk through that. Think of negotiating your salary and compare it to selling your home, okay? Take the perspective of the seller. The more extreme first offers lead to higher final settlements. High anchor offers lead buyers to focus on a negotiated item's positive attributes. And in addition, an aggressive first offer allows you to offer concessions and still reach an agreement that's much better than your alternatives. So you want to go in high and you want to go in aggressive. And we can always come down and that's okay. But if you go in too low and there's no place to go to, you're going to be really sorry that you did that. So in contrast, A non-aggressive first offer leaves you with two unappealing options: make small concessions or stand by your demands. So we want to go in high and we want to go in aggressive. We want something to play with here. So before you go in, you have to do some research and you have to know what the lowest amount is you'd accept. And then don't leave that lowest amount. So know what that is. It's often called the reservation value or the bottom line. So know your bottom line when you're going into a negotiation. We always hope to do better than our reservation value or our bottom line, but it's important to know what yours is, both to avoid accepting a deal you shouldn't have and as a reference point for how much a current deal is worth to you. So do your research and know exactly what that bottom line is. If you're buying, a bottom line is the highest price you'd pay, right? And if you're selling, a bottom line is the lowest amount you would accept. So keep those two differentiators in mind. Now, having a firm grasp on your reservation value or your bottom line is important from a psychological perspective. If you anchor it into your mind, you'll be less anchored by the other person's offer. We think we're going in with a high offer and the other person comes in with a lower offer, and that's okay because we have room to play there. And don't get psyched out by that, because most of us will get psyched out by that and we think, oh my gosh, I just went in with this huge offer and we'll never get to where we need to be. But you'll actually be better off when you go in with that higher anchored offer. So what is your BANTA? The reason we negotiate is to produce something better than the results you can obtain without negotiating, right? What are those results and what is your alternative? So let's talk about BANTA. A BANTA is your best alternative to a negotiated agreement. It's a little different from what your bottom line is because you want to take into account everything you're trying to accomplish through this negotiation. It's the standard to which any proposed agreement should be measured. Best alternative to a negotiated agreement. So let's just not think dollars here. It's the only standard that can protect you both from accepting terms that are too unfavorable and from rejecting terms it would be in your interest to accept. So go in knowing what your BANTA looks like. Now, have you ever done this when you're in a meeting? Mirror the other person's behavior. This is really important because when people are getting along, they mimic one another. Mirroring others' accents, speech patterns, facial expressions, and body language. Now, accents, obviously, you don't want to do that if you don't have that accent when you're going into it. But if people are smiling, you want to smile. If somebody's got their elbows on the table, mirror that and put your elbows on the table. Somebody's got their arms crossed, then cross your arms. But as you start to mirror the other person's behavior, you're actually going to come to a connection and you'll start to really feel good about working with each other. You want to do this first. You don't want the other person to start mirroring your behavior before you mirror them, because that gives you the upper hand. So I want you to think about that. A Stanford Northwestern INSEAD study found that people who were coached to mimic their negotiated partner's behavior not only negotiated a better deal, but expanded the pie for both people. So it's all about relationships in what we do, right? So think about that. If you're making a connection and you're feeling good about each other, you're going to negotiate a better deal for both of you. Negotiators who mimicked the mannerisms of their opponents both secured better individual outcomes, and their dyads as a whole also performed better when mimicking occurred compared to when it did not. So they've done these studies, and if you're mimicking each other and you've got the upper hand, people are going to like you because they think you're more like them. And if you're not mimicking them, then it's going to put a little bit of a crutch between you. So find that happy medium and that comfort level so that you can both come together and feel good about each other. Now, I thought this was really interesting. A Stanford Harvard study recently cited on marginal revolutions suggests that accomplishments aren't what capture people's attention. It's really what the person's perceived potential is. So it's not always about them winning, but it's really about what you can show that your potential is. This uncertainty that comes with potential appears to be more cognitively engaging than reflecting on what is already known to be true. So not only do you want to go in there with a strong position, but you want to go in there showing that you have strong potential to get through this negotiation and make sure that people are going to come to an end. Remember, we talk about keeping the end in mind. So think about what your end results want to be, and then prove that you can go in there and make it happen. This is really important, that you don't want to leave yourself open to demand a single number. New research indicates that people respond best when they're given a range. So when you state a number that you're looking for, give it a range. For instance, as you see, $100,000 salary, ask for 100 to 120. So 100 is your bottom line number that we talked about. But you want to give them a range because you can say, I'll look at 100, between 100 and 120, and then you can talk about why you believe that you are deserving of that and give some facts and some backup. So you want to make sure too that you're going in knowing, if you feel like there's a single number and a range that you're worthy of, why is that? Having done your research, make sure that you're out in the market seeing what your value is in the market, and you've got some facts to back that up. So always think about a range, having your bottom line being the lower range. And if you get more than your bottom line, then you're ecstatic about that, right? So think about going into that. When you offer a range, it strikes people as more reasonable than standing firm on a single number. And you're less likely to get hit with an extreme counteroffer, which suddenly becomes way less possible. So if you go in there and say, I'm looking at a number between 100 and 120, it's now given them a guideline. Whereas you say, if I'm really looking for $100,000, they're going to come back and immediately say, well, that's too high. So you have to think about this psychologically as well. So when you go in, give them a range, and it really gives them an opportunity to look at that range and feel better about what you're asking for. I've got a little heart there because it's Valentine's Day, but let's talk about what you should say about yourself. We don't want to get too personal, but we did an experiment at Northwestern and Stanford universities, and the students were asked to negotiate over email. Some went straight to business, exchanging only names and email addresses, and then went into their negotiation. Others went off topic, schmoozing, if you will, about hometowns and hobbies and things that they're taking in class. Now look at the results. The schmoozers reached an agreement 59% of the time, while the business only made it 40% of the time. So we want to build that relationship. We want to be comfortable in who it is we're talking to. And over email, it's a little bit easier because you're not throwing yourself out there, but it's about the relationship. So when you're going into a meeting to negotiate, talk about current events, talk about what's going on in the market, get that little platform down so that you have something that you know about each other. Do your homework beforehand, right? If they look them up on Google or LinkedIn. They might have gone to the same college as you have, and that's a great icebreaker. They might love animals, and that's always a great icebreaker. So look at what the commonality is so that when you tell them something about yourself, it just calms things down and really allows for that connection to happen. Now, keep all your options on the table. A lot of people think they have an ace that they're going to pull out later, and that's not always the best strategy. Skilled negotiators don't sequence the topics within a negotiation. They keep everything on the table. Let's talk about what I mean. So instead of saying, let's resolve the salary first, and then we'll move on to other issues, you resolve components of the agreement altogether. Location, vacation, signing bonus, health benefits, if we're talking about salary. So you want to list almost an agenda of what you want to get accomplished. And as you get them accomplished, you might say, okay, the salary is great, so let's do the salary and then we'll move on. But if you're not getting the right vacation time or a sign-on bonus or the benefits, you don't want to have closed the opportunity for the salary, because if you're not getting what you need on the other end, you want to make sure that you still can negotiate that salary. So make sure you're keeping all your options open, because you don't want to sell yourself short by agreeing that $120,000 is a good salary, but then you're not getting the benefits or the vacation time or the location that you need, and then you can't go back and renegotiate. So keep them on the table. By keeping all of the issues on the table, you've got the flexibility to propose a trade on whatever it is you're looking for. So that's the important part, is you want to make sure that you're keeping those options open, or you're going to sell yourself short. So obviously, knowing the context, knowing who the people are and a little bit about their background, knowing what your bottom line is, and then keeping everything on the table. So in conclusion, I want to talk about 3 things. First of all, you knew all the time, right? Everything I've shared with you today, you already know. It's just a matter of knowing how to utilize it and also knowing what you're doing going into it. These are just good reminders for you, because we don't do this every day. Second, learn from doing. Practice, 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 right? The only way you're going to get to Carnegie Hall is if you practice. So if you're in a position where you have to negotiate a lot, don't be afraid to sit and negotiate with yourself, or find somebody that's a peer who you can practice negotiating with. This is going to be really important, because you're only going to get comfortable the more you do it, right? So you have to learn from doing. And if you can't find a peer or a partner who you can work with, don't think it's silly to sit and negotiate with yourself in front of a mirror. It's really going to help you see how you handle yourself. Eye contact is very important, right? So you want to make sure that you've got that eye contact, and you want to make sure that you're comfortable in what you're doing. Don't try to go in and negotiate when you've never negotiated before, you haven't practiced. That will be just a sign for disaster. And then lastly, let's talk about winning. You want to win. Doesn't necessarily always have to be a win-win situation for everybody. But in most instances, to ask a negotiator who's winning is as inappropriate as to ask who's winning in a marriage, right? Today, we're talking about how to win the important game, how to achieve a better process for dealing with your differences. To be better, the process must, of course, produce good, substantial results. And winning on the merits may not be the only goal, but certainly losing is not what you want to achieve. Your goal is to go in and win and get the better part of the negotiation. So both theory and experience suggest that the method of principled negotiation will produce over the long run substantial outcomes that are as good or better than you are likely to obtain by using any other negotiation strategy. So it should prove more efficient and less costly to human relationships. The last thing you want to do is have a lose-lose negotiation. So start with a win-win negotiation, but you always want to come out ahead. Go in being prepared, knowing what your bottom line is, knowing what your banter is, and then you will come out being the one who wins. So I have enjoyed visiting with everybody today. I don't have any questions that have come my way, so you all know everything you need to know about negotiating skills. And I'm always obviously available if you need to reach out to me after. So thank you for joining me today on Teachable Tuesdays with negotiating skills. This will be recorded if you have an opportunity and want to go back and look at it later if you didn't take notes or you have some questions. So have a great day. Thank you for stopping in today and having your lunch hour with me, and we'll look forward to talking to you soon.